Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the stream. I hope everybody's all good. I hope you've had a decent week. Mine's been stressful. Seems to be the key word for everything that goes on in my life at the moment when it comes to my real life work. However, I am making quite significant progress with the next review, the review for Zardoz, which is quite heartening. I had to go into work today, so I spent a little bit of time because there wasn't much for me personally to do. So I sat down and just cranked out about 1,500 words or so towards the script. Currently, it stands at about 2,800 words at the moment, but it's about halfway there. So I suspect it's going to be quite a big one. It'll be quite an interesting one because there's a lot going on in that film. Some intentional, some a lot not so much. It's an interesting one, apart from anything. And it's one of the joys about writing about this stuff is that it forces you to really kind of look that bit deeper into what the film's actually trying to do and where it stands, kind of socially and politically on certain things. And there's a lot of stuff within Zardoz that goes on that, shall we say, is very much of its time. And I'm going to try to soften the blow a bit because I know people get a little bit kind of... some people get a bit annoyed when I go into that kind of stuff. But it's kind of integral to this particular film. There's a massive component of things like the sex war, if you like. It's one of the threads that goes on in this particular film, and it's just so much of these various things that it tries to do that's, or at least kind of brushes on and comments on quite explicitly, but then sort of walks away from. It doesn't really fully explore everything, but it's an interesting film, and a lot more interesting than I think people give it credit for, because people really only kind of, generally kind of know it for seeing Sean Connery in that rather extraordinary costume. But there's a lot more going on there. It's just how successful it is and kind of where it stands within history. So it's kind of fascinating in that respect. But thank you, DC. But welcome one, welcome all. We've got Daniel, who is apparently coming from the San Francisco Bay. Which, to us Brits is quite exotic. To the Americans may mean something completely different. I've got no idea, but it's San Francisco's always been one of those places that I kind of within America that's kind of fascinated me. For whatever reason, there's something about that place which has holds some kind of interest to me. So you never know. One day, if I ever do a bit of a tour of the States, but yeah. Thank you, Richard. I'm looking forward to getting it done, to be honest, as well. It's been, I know production's been somewhat slow and all that kind of stuff over this last couple of years and stuff, but yeah, it's a joy when I do actually get something done. I think Josh kind of put it quite nicely. Josh Hadley put it quite nicely when he said that. He hates writing, but he loves having written. I don't know if he's borrowed that from somewhere or if that's an original Hadleyism. But but yeah, we won't hang around too long before we get started with the first one. Hopefully, Spike will be able to join us because the first film on tonight is actually. It's kind of for him. Spike's been sort of absent for a while for one reason or another, and as one of our beloved members of the community, he did mention on the last stream. It's a little bit of a cliche with him, but it's a deliberate one of Al Cliver. So we're watching Lucio Fulci's The Black Cat, a little bit of Edgar Allan Poe. or at least his interpretation of it. And Al Cliver is in this. I have no idea how much. I can't quite remember, but yeah. Watched Ramble on Suicide Squad. I'm surprised they were able to do the reboot. Suicide Squad, yeah. DC has been kind of scrambling to change, and to be fair, they've made some very significant changes. What with the Batman film and the Suicide Squad and a couple of bits, they've really kind of started changing their game, probably for the better. And I think it'll work better when they have those kind of much more standalone films with a little bit more kind of directorial voice and all that sort of stuff. So yeah. Hey, John. Yes, John's been communicating with me about John Borman and stuff like that. So John's a very big John Borman fan. I find I'm more fascinated by John Borman than I am a fan. There's things about him that are quite interesting, and I hope I make some fairly interesting sort of comparisons with John Borman and some other directors in the review, but I won't spoil that. But yeah, on a serious note, I really hope you're feeling better. I know you weren't doing too well last time. Also, how is Josh? What happened with Scott? I don't know what happened with Scott. The last I heard, I mean, this was years ago as well, he kept basically getting his trial put off and all that kind of stuff. Josh, however, is doing the Josh thing. He's actually kind of at university. I think, yeah, he's at university studying a degree, which by all accounts he's kind of acing. So, as for me, I'm constantly tired, constantly stressed, which is, this has been the last 2 years. It's been quite tricky to navigate in one way or another, but it's one of those things you sort of have to kind of stiff up a lip and all that kind of stuff and try and push your way through. I should be alright. I think I've got to make a few changes in my life to some degree, but yeah, I hit 50 this year, so changes one of those things. It's funny actually, because I was having a bit of an argument with my boss, and I was complaining. Well, I was talking about certain things, and I won't go into too much detail. And he goes, "Oh, well, I may be struggling with change and stuff like that, And I'm just like, kind of like, change is one thing, but what we're facing at the moment is it just feels random and pointless, So, but that's the way it is. I'm trying to wrestle a theatre back into existence, and there's a lot of growing pains with that, because I'm working with a lot of people who really don't understand. Not through malice, but they've got different goals, and running a theatre is a very specific type of discipline. Not least that you have to do things like plan a year in advance. Which, yeah, Kieran says, fucking hate. Friedman hates Borman with a passion. Yeah, he's not a fan. He's not a fan. Borman did what he did with Exorcist 2. It was a mess. I think even Borman kind of understands that it was a mess. It is one of the things I do touch on in the review. Because Borman, to do with his approach and the way he writes and stuff like that, there's certain things that he's prone to. But yeah. Yes, that's correct, DC. Unfortunately, that was the case. And Josh was, shall we say, not happy, especially after people like him and a few other people gave him a very rough ride during a personal kind of personal problems in life. But yeah. Anyway, if everybody gets themselves all kind of lined up with the first video, which will be the Black Cat, we've got a reasonable quality copy to watch, fortunately. So we'll get started with that in about 5-10 minutes. But yeah. just catching up with those. Excuse me. I had a curry earlier on, and it did not sit. It was nice, but a lot spicier than I thought it was going to be. So I'm a bit kind of wiped at the moment. Yeah, I've been meaning to actually get something started with Josh. A couple of little projects. It's tricky. It's tricky because of my real life workload is very demanding. There's kind of personal life stuff, which demands a certain amount of attention, and all those kind of things. It's not turn it into a whine, but as I say, life has a tendency to get in the way. Oh dear, curry, you're going to have a blast on the way. I'm very used to spicy food. I do like really good spicy food. Problem with some curries, I tend to prefer like kind of Malaysian curries and that kind of region of curries as opposed to Indian curries. And the one I had today, I think, was kind of more airing towards the Indian curry. Indian curries are great. They're very kind of like flavourful and very full flavours. But the problem is they're a bit more heavy going, generally speaking. They kind of have a tendency to occasionally sort of sit in your guts and kind of go, oh, yeah, you ate too much, mate. And of course, me being me, kind of cooking a meal for one person, generally speaking, I end up making a frigging mountain of this stuff as well. Don't forget to stick the loo roll in the fridge tonight. You know what I mean? Funny enough, the only food that I generally that kind of goes anywhere near kind of that effect tends to be these really super hot ramen noodles that I get from their local Chinese superstore. Malaysian curry tends to be more sweet and spicy. Indian curry, I think, is revenge. They're just they're a much they tend to be a much flatter kind of plateau of flavours than the Malaysians. Malaysians have much more kind of like highlighted accents to the kind of food that they create. It's much closer in that sort of respect to certain Chinese foods. It's an interesting sort of crossover between the two, though. You ordered a dal on your birthday, put too much chili in it. I had a fal one time. It's a bit of a dare, and yeah, it was hot, but it wasn't unmanageable. What's the spiciest thing? You know what? I don't know. I mean, I make some really, really kind of like spicy ribs and things like that. I am very much a fan of spicy foods. To the point that most people, if I make them a dinner, they can't handle it. And it's not that hot to me. It's like kind of like, yeah, it's got a bit of a kick to it. It's nice, but most people it's way too much. Okay, if you start giving us a thumbs up when you're ready, and we'll get off the subject of curries. As much as I could rattle on for hours about all that stuff, I love cooking, and I love foods from all sorts of places. I think the worst kind of heat that you get, though, is because there's different types. Start giving thumbs up and stuff when you're ready. So, the worst kind of spicy, and I've had many types. You get some which is kind of a more kind of burns in your mouth and stuff like that, but it's kind of like it's fast and then it kind of subsides really quick. The worst ones are the ones that really kind of build up on you. And I had this stuff called pure pain paste, which I'd sent over to Reckless Eating one time. And that stuff was brutal. To the point I would use about half a teaspoon of that stuff in a big batch of chili. And it was way hot, but it's really nice flavour. When you kind of like spread it out a bit, it's a really, really gorgeous flavour. But it's got that kick, and I tried a little bit, just like a quarter of a teaspoon of this stuff. I spent about 40 minutes dying. Okay, folks, we'll get started, and I'm sure we'll probably be chatting about all sorts of stuff during the film. So we're going to go with the 1981 film, Lucio Fulci, The Black Cat. So we're going to start on 5 and go on go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Now I do have the VHS of this. In an interesting video case, it was kind of a later one. Anchor Bay release. Quite nice. There's something of the Straw Dogs about this opening, isn't there? Just with, 100% less Susan George. It's something about the quality, isn't there? I think of a British landscape. Gives a very different texture to the horror film kind of vibe. I mean, these towns and villages are, kind of like the staple of the British countryside. So, what's the cure for spiciness? Drinking milk and avoiding water, is that it? A lot of people go with milk. Yogurt would be a good one. If you got like a drinking yogurt type thing, that would kill it. But I find a good lager usually does it as well. Very Lucio Fulci-esque shot, isn't it, of the guy coming through the windscreen, that kind of slow motion. It's funny, isn't it? The kind of violence in that scene, it's very Lucio Fulci, but it's also kind of very much more subtle Lucio Fulci. It's interesting how he handles those scenes. Very traditional Italian village. I think he did occasionally get out of Italy, didn't he? I love these titles. Actually, it's really beautiful cinematography on that. It's one of those things. Lucio Fulci is actually, when he's at his best, when he's doing his best work and with his more attentive work, is really good. Yeah, Al Cliver. Farmer was in a French film I watched recently called La Traque. Kinda French straw dogs, but nowhere near as violent. Really? I love this soundtrack as well. I really need to find some Al Cliver films where he's far, far more prominent other than Zombie Flesh Eaters, don't I? Although the usual suspects that we know him from. At this point, I want Al Cliver to headline the next Marvel film. See, it's one of those actors that I constantly take the piss out of, but the actual guy seems to be a really, really cool person. So they went up to Fulci. Well, Fulci went up to the producers, potential producers at the time, says, going to make a film with a lot of pussy in it. Oh, really, Kieran? To see if we can find that. Interesting. Pussy vision, yes. It's a family-friendly stream, yes. Since when? It'll be interesting to see, you know, a film that was done like that, wouldn't it? Val Clover at the head of a Marvel film. They've scheduled so much in that series of in the new kind of phase, and there's literally like about maybe 2 bits I want to watch. I may watch the new Spider-Man. A lot of people have been kind of saying that's pretty good, and the Doctor Strange film, but that's pretty much it. Well, for the time, quite possibly, because obviously this is just after the wave of like kind of things like the Black Emmanuel films and things like that. Well, maybe about 8 years or so. Blue Iris is geeking out on the 80s technology. It's amazing in some respects how a lot of these films actually managed to survive anywhere in Britain. The BBFC were obviously at that time not very friendly towards anything with Lucio Fulci's name on. It is, Kerry, yeah. And that's the thing, Fulci, when he had the kind of like the time, the passion, and the people around him, would make some amazing stuff. I mean, you could argue that, you know, some aspects of like his most famous films are nowhere near as good as this, but they still often had that flair. When you're talking about films like The Beyond in particular, it's so visually stylish. I want to see George Eastman come round the corner in his Anthropophagus makeup. I kind of get where you're coming from. The thing is, there were so many different 80s looks as well, though, wasn't there? Certainly, there. You know, when you look at the Italian film end of things, which is kind of, you know, the first kind of film I really started getting into, where really got into at the beginning of me kind of like being able to legitimately call myself a film fan. And this kind of look, you know, and things like Argento's films and a lot of the Giallo and Mario Bava, they had a wonderful kind of soft feel to them. And it is one of those things, everybody's so kind of het up on high definition. It's got to be super, super crisp, and it's got to be in 4K and all this kind of stuff. And there's something just more restful and peaceful, I think, in some respects, with this kind of visual quality. And you know, partly that's because they're filming on film, recording on film. And there is something about, again, when you look at a lot of these Italian films, or even kind of like, well, European exploitation films that were filmed in Britain, and you compare them to the kind of like the ones that were filmed like in Italy and other countries, Britain has a very specific kind of light, sunlight. It's not quite the same as most other places. There may be other places in Europe specifically that kind of have a similar kind of skies, but Britain has a kind of very recognisable sort of colour temperature to the sunlight. And it always sort of shows up. You look at Living Dead in Manchester Morgue and stuff like that, for instance, though, that you see it there. There's this sort of very very soft kind of warmth to the light. It's like it always feels like it's an early spring kind of sun. Al Cliver breaks the department, no dialogue shot. Yeah. First saw this back in the late 80s, wasn't aware that this was a Fulci film, but saw his name on a VHS sleeve, signed up to a video shop there and then to rent it. Fulci's always such a he's an odd character when it comes to the directing kind of thing, because he can make a film like this and then turn round and make The New York Ripper. In that respect, he's not really much different to the Jess Francos of the world and stuff like that. But there seems to be something quite of extremes when it comes to Lucio Fulci. The subject matter can be more or less the kind of same sort of thing, murder and all those kind of things. But the way he presents those things can be very, very different. And sometimes it is, like with Zombie Flesh Eaters, it's pure exploitation. That's all it is. It's not a deep story. But then you get other more interesting stories like Don't Torture a Duckling and, film like this, where it's a lot more thoughtful. And then you get the stuff which is his kind of pure journey of imagination and horror, which is films like The Beyond and House by the Cemetery and stuff like that, or City of the Living Dead, which are kind of like real sort of sitting right in the middle of his kind of muses. I love The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue. I think it's such a fascinating kind of example of the genre. And I love the fact that it's where it's set, the place it's set is just one of the more beautiful parts of Britain. And in this just utter beauty, there's this deep, deep kind of horror going on. If I can be weird, but I think one director whose shot composition I admire a lot is Abel Ferrara. Yeah, he's an interesting one. Driller Killer in particular is one of those films that so many people kind of immediately dismissed as just being a mindless exploitation film, just gore for gore's sake, and it doesn't have that much gore. It is a film that I would legitimately call a sort of punk art house. It's got that really kind of grimy punk kind of attitude with the band and the way it sort of shoots those grimy New York in the 1970s kind of scenes. And everything's sort of saturated in that. But it's doing something. And I have made the comparison between the story of that and the story of Oedipus is an interesting thing. Abel Ferrara is a smart guy. And even though he's often been dismissive of it, I don't think he should be. Yeah, Fulci is a very he's a tricky personality to pin down. On the one hand, you've got some very, very, very strong female characters that feature in a lot of his films. But on the other hand, he treats a lot of his recurring actresses as absolute pieces of shit. And some of the stuff that Catriona MacColl, for one, tell about their time working with Fulci are very illuminating as to who he is. And Giovanni Lombardo Radice also was kind of verified a lot of this stuff, you know. And he's always fascinating. The City of the Living Dead commentary track with Giovanni Lombardo Radice is actually an interesting one. He's always been an actor that he kind of has these very, very strange roles, done little kind of off kilter, has that off kilter feel to it, but a fascinating guy, and it's interesting to see his sort of emotional journey of kind of accepting these films that he participated in. Because there was a time he didn't want anything to do with them particularly, but it was work, you know, so... You know what? I'm sure I've seen The Psychic, but I cannot remember an awful lot about it. I will have to seek it out again. John loves Ferrara's Body Snatchers and Bad Lieutenant. Yeah, I mean the original Bad Lieutenant was a is a very Ferrara film, to say the least. You feel dirty almost from watching it. It's just this. It's like this film quality. Just has this kind of weird, sort of visually tacky kind of sort of quality to it. It's grimy. It's uncomfortable. His Body Snatchers has some interesting things, but I think too many people have had a go at it, so I kind of struggle to really kind of get the point of it apart from anything else. I do love talking with John about these things because, well, we have a personal relationship in terms of we used to work together and talk about movies all the time. I've said this before, obviously, but John's take on films is almost uniquely more positive than mine. I tend to be a lot more nitpicky. John's very much a fan of so many of these films, regardless of kind of things that I would pick out as weaknesses. And John Borman is a good example of that. Not to say that I don't like John Borman, I actually do quite a lot. But there's some interesting kind of things that I kind of quirks of his that I would pick up on, which John would kind of like enjoy a lot more maybe than I would. You know what? I haven't watched any of my VHS cassettes for quite a while, so I'm going to have to rehook up my my video cassette player. My landlord said he had a spare one. It was like brand new, but it was all boxed and stuff. But it's never been used. That he was going to give me, so I may end up with a third. Yes, this score is amazing, isn't it? Look at this shot. Is wonderful. It's an interesting kind of there's kind of aspects of it which feel very kind of fictional in a gothic horror kind of way with the way it's visually kind of laid out and all that sort of stuff. But nothing as outrageous as in some of the other films. I mean, the editing in this and the cinematography in this, yeah, there he is, Al Cliver. All those things are kind of this is Fulci really kind of on his top game. Although, you know, a lot of people who would claim to be Fulci fans wouldn't necessarily kind of enjoy this as much because it's not as gory a film. I love that the VHS artwork because it's often gaudy. There's a few of them over there that I've got that I specifically got because of the artwork. And yes, you can put it on a DVD cover and all that kind of stuff, but it's not as big. It's like the difference between having vinyl albums and stuff. And cassettes, you know, because vinyl albums and cassettes, obviously a big difference in size. You know, I always cite the one thing that I remember very much from my childhood was my parents' vinyl collection with Moody Blues albums, and some of their album cover work on there was just incredible. I do love riding motorbikes around areas like that, going through towns and villages like that, and countryside like that. I mean, I live in Cambridgeshire. If anybody kind of like knows Cambridge, it's very flat, and that's the one thing I do miss about being in Leicestershire. Leicestershire's not particularly, it's not mountainous or anything, but it has really nice rolling hills. It's always a treat. It's fantastic roads around there to ride. Yeah, it does, doesn't it, John? That's one of the things a lot of people don't really think about is, you know, when it comes to cinematography, choices of lenses is can radically alter how the film comes across. I mean, it's not just in the basics of what you're actually seeing on the screen, but what that kind of thing sort of presents. You know, I mean, the most extreme example is when you use something with a very wide angle, so you get that fisheye kind of thing going on. And it's something I kind of exploit in my photography these days a little bit on occasions. I spent about 600 quid on a lens. That's not an expensive lens either. I know, Kerry. Oh, you're right, Kieran. Family's important. Speaking of which, hi, Gary. It's interesting, isn't it? They a lot of filmmakers who aren't from Britain, when they do kind of like, you know, cast British actors, will want them to kind of like put on a British accent, despite the fact that they already speak with one. And so it's kind of interesting that Fulci sort of didn't really go down that line, because the accents in this are generally not pushed further than they need to be. You've forgotten that David Warbeck from The Beyond is in this. Fulci was very typical of the Euro exploitation directors, wasn't he? I mean, if you look at any of them, Joe D'Amato, Jess Franco, Bruno Mattei, Lucio Fulci, any of them really. Argento, they tended to have a bunch of people that they would like to work with. So these people would kind of keep appearing. David Lynch does the same thing. And it's interesting because, you know, when you look at some of these directors who have real kind of like strong followings, particularly in genre films and that kind of stuff, they tend to kind of work with almost like an extended family of people that they like. Fulci was a bit funny though. One of the actresses, it's the actress in City of the Living Dead, the one that vomits all the guts out of her mouth. She's been in several of his films and treated pretty badly, but he keeps getting her back. Mostly because I think she was game to do some pretty gross stuff. A lot of actresses just would not have put up with. Genre movies have their fair share of auteurs. Yeah, or auteurism, if that's a word. To be an auteur is not as exclusive a club as a lot of people kind of think. When you say the word auteur, a lot of people kind of think, you know, it's very high-minded, it's, you know, it's either snobbish or it's kind of a whole host of negative things. And it's not. To be an auteur, you've just got to be able to kind of put your directorial stamp upon the film that you're making, and be consistent with that throughout your work, at least to an extent. It's more a description of how recognizable your films are, your styles, your techniques, the way you work, the way you write, all those kind of things. Those are what make an auteur. So there are some bad filmmakers who are auteurs. Jess Franco, throughout his career, made some truly great films and some truly awful films. But you can generally tell a Jess Franco film. Yeah, that's right, Kieran. Yeah. I think that's what makes Euro Gothic horror work better than American, i.e. the atmosphere is just so much more realistic with Hammer's work. It made it a lot more accessible in the long term. But there's something about the kind of the British countryside and stuff, because it's clearly modern, but it's also ancient. You know, there's very old kind of buildings, and because America is so much more modern. There's not as much history by a long shot. That a lot of the buildings and stuff like that are, because they're so new, they don't feel like they've got a history. You look at the buildings in this shot where he's crossing the street, and you know there's character to them, that you just know that, you know, there's a lot of history has happened in those places, genuinely as well as potentially in the film. But it looks almost fantasy, you know. I imagine, especially to people from places like America, where the architecture is generally a lot newer. But in Britain, you know, if you'd spent all your life growing up in the city and stuff like that, these little villages and stuff can have an almost fantasy kind of feel to them as well. Recently began watching some of the Terence Fisher movies, Dracula and Hand on a Baskerville's pretty good. Yeah. I've always said I need to make more of an effort with kind of sitting, trying to kind of get more familiar with Hammer films, which seems like an odd hole in my kind of film watching. But it's always been partly, it's never really quite got with me, because I mean, I started off with films like Alien and things like that, and Hammer always felt very quaint in comparison. But since then, I've watched a lot of films which are kind of Hammer-esque, but Italian or Spanish made, for instance, and they're quite enjoyable. So, and I do like Christopher Lee and those other actors as well. And Christopher Lee obviously has been in several Jess Franco films along the way. It's always kind of amusing. I mean, he always puts his best into anything that he's doing, even if it's a really low-rent film. But he was, often looks a little bit baffled by what's happening in Jess Franco's films. Hello, Kool-Aid. Britain has some really amazingly diverse countryside. When you look at something like Zardoz, no, not Britain, it's Ireland. It's very similar to certain parts of Great Britain. There's really kind of remote feeling mountainous regions and stuff like that, and little lochs and lakes and stuff like that. You go right up north into Scotland, up to northern Scotland, and it's just this awe-inspiringly barren landscape of mountains and stuff. It's like, it's quite incredible. You go to Wales, it's all very mountainous. You come to like East Anglia, it's very flat. It's like flat as a pancake. To the point that most of the landscape is reclaimed. There's a clever cat. Yeah, it can be difficult to get hold of some films, can't it? When it comes to the American stuff, I mean, I do really enjoy the kind of stuff that uses the landscapes of America, because again, America incredibly diverse when it comes to the kind of vistas that you can be working in. And Enter the Devil was a film that really benefited from its, I believe, Texas, mountainous sort of Texas region. That landscape in it just added so much character to it. And you get other things like Deliverance, for instance, another John Borman film, which makes wonderful use of the Appalachians. Yes, that's right, Johnny. He doesn't like to travel, does he? But why not? It's a fantastically gorgeous area. I would love to go on holiday to the Wicklow area and photograph some of the shooting locations. Bad kitty. Bad kitty. Without looking it up, guess who made Nude for Satan? Should we? I don't know. Is it a Jess Franco film that I haven't heard of? I can't remember. The Landscape Didn't Hurt High Plains Drifter, which is essentially a spooky western. Yeah. Films like Dust Devil and stuff like that, also just kind of really capitalised on those locations. The Hitch, those dry, dusty desert roads. The Hills Have Eyes. So many really, really kind of use that wonderful landscapes. Worst director of all time. There's quite a few choices there. George Lucas? Oh, get it in the neck for that comment. Muggy. No, I know I'm being hyperbolic, DC. God, Michael Bay. See, the thing is, I don't think Michael Bay's necessarily a terrible director, but he does not have a feel for characters or story. That's where his trouble lies. He's very, very skilled visually. But yeah, it's kind of what he does with that is more of an issue. Having a lot of fun with my little game. I picked up this film actually a little while ago. I'm going to be trying to make time for that at some point very soon. As I understand it, it's kind of in the sort of maniac kind of area of horror. James Wan. I think he's an interesting director. He's had hits and misses, which is fine. But well, Michael Bay comes from the sort of rock video and advertising kind of thing, but he's never really grown past that, has he? Plenty of directors had the same route, but they kind of could actually tell a story without being so juvenile. I mean, George Romero was in the kind of industrial films and advertising game before he started making feature films. Hello, Everett. Well, Bay sort of, shall we say, grew up under him, didn't he? The Bruckheimer Scott kind of thing. I'm not a fan of Tony Scott's films particularly either. Yeah, it's where you it's a natural career progress sort of thing. People are more likely to give you a commercial to do than to make a feature film. So yeah, you learn your craft in doing stuff like that. It's like with theatre, you don't start kind of like by being the light designer in a West End production. You know, you've got to work your way up, haven't you? George R. Abrams. I think Abrams is more careless and reckless than bad. But you know, I mean, a lot of filmmakers that are under fire these days is, in my opinion, mostly because they just don't really care about character, and character is one of the most important things in telling a story. If you haven't got characters, then it's hard to relate. It's hard to connect. Even when you've got something that's really weird characters like Eraserhead, those characters that are in there, there's a lot of information about those characters as you go along. Zack Snyder. See, Zack Snyder's not necessarily a bad director, but he's kind of got a very... I don't know, he's got a very odd kind of point of view. Again, I think it comes down to character when it's Zack Snyder as much as anything. He doesn't seem to care much for the characters. It's just my opinion, but yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing The Batman, actually, because that'll be an interesting one. It was an interesting take on the Joker, which is a kind of like cut-out scene. Or it was an after credits extra or something like that. But I watched that and it was like, that's kind of interesting, you know. If that's the sort of look and feel of where they're going, you know, that kind of characterization. And of course, you got the Joker as well, which is very much a character study. Edward Jr. is too nice a human being to be referred to as bad, lacking aptitude for certain. He was passionate. You can definitely say that everything he did was a labour of love, and it had to be, because it's not like he had all the money in the world. But he wasn't a very good filmmaker. He wasn't a very good storyteller. But there's real enthusiasm in what he does. And that goes a long way. Sincerity and enthusiasm for what you're doing. There's all too many films that kind of, you know, you can sit down and watch that are, you know, technically very good, well made, all that kind of stuff, but don't really have much heart and soul. No, that's the vast majority of what Hollywood kicks out these days. What timestamp are we on for the film? We are at 42 minutes and 15 seconds. Now, John's either kind of done a typo or he's kind of trolling you. See, I don't need a film to be perfect. I just need it to be not being cynical towards me as a viewer, and for it to be sincere with what it's doing. What's most interesting now, Kieran, is really that, you know, when you look at directors like Batzella and Dora and I don't know Fidani, but it's kind of interesting to try and find out where they're coming from, and that can kind of inform an awful lot on what it is they do. And people sort of went with the August Underground stuff, for instance, which is some of my least favourite stuff I've ever seen in my entire life. Somebody kind of like said, you know, they're nice guys, they're trying to do this, that, and the other, and I just could not see it in that. You know, I mean, I look at a lot of that stuff, and it feels like it's the worst kind of exploitation to me. Like it's I don't know, maybe that's not the right word. It feels like watching the wrong kind of pornography for you, if you know when I watch that sort of thing. Oh, bad kitty. I think there's so much about Ed Wood that was quite fascinating. Not least, some of the personal aspects of his life. But there's something about his films that just really kind of resonated for whatever reason with a lot of people. Not in a meaningful, deep kind of way, but just in a sense that people could be, shocked and astounded by how watchable a film that is clearly inept can be. For us as film fans and stuff like that, particularly, when it comes to the kind of films that we concentrate on channels like this, there's a lot of films that people would absolutely say is just a terrible film. But we find something in them, don't we? Wow. Now, it's definitely getting very faulty at this point, isn't it? The poor melting woman. Oh, they're around, I think, Gav. It's just finding them, and because the texture of films has changed so much as well now. Because everybody can make a film. Everybody, you've all got mobile phones with cameras and stuff like that. If you want something which is semi-professional looking, or at least fully professional looking, there's affordable solutions to that now. Because it's all on digital, it's easier to manipulate, it's cheaper to manipulate. You can do it at home. Special effects are, an easier thing to achieve. Editing is much, much easier. So I think it's harder now to find people who are both serious and, talented, because it's this big pile of stuff. A good example would be film criticism and stuff like that on YouTube and the likes. Back in the day, I'd probably never have had a chance to do what I do with things like my channel. But now there's some really, really great ones, but there's some really fucking awful ones, and it's hard to find the great ones. I would hope I'm at least on the decent level. I do try to kind of put some effort into what I do. There's a few channels I sort of subscribe to because I saw a video that I liked, and then you eventually sort of get sick of the kind of more contrived style of it. But yeah. So what I do and what YouTubers do in general, it's subject to the same kind of risks that filmmakers always had. You can make something which is pompous and pretentious, or kind of just there for mass appeal. Something which the algorithm doesn't really help, because they want that. They want you on the thumbnail going, oh, kind of thing. That, as a fact, just kind of points you in the direction of the kind of people that run YouTube. That the algorithm favours a thumbnail of somebody making a rather twonky face. Mad Foxes 2 needs to be done. Yes. Even Kubrick left a few helicopters in shots. Yes, he did. Yeah. And he was unapologetic about it. It wasn't like he missed it. It was like kind of, it's there. That has always been a bone of contention with me, and one of the bones of contention with me and like the hardcore Kubrick fans, that he was absolutely infallible as a filmmaker and stuff. And you tend to find those people kind of fall into the conspiracy theorist type camp, that he's kind of revered in that sort of way, and that everything he says every single thing that he says has meaning. And it's not. He is a filmmaker just like anybody else. He's just a very talented filmmaker. Some people, quite a few people said that they find Christopher Nolan pretentious. I wouldn't say that personally. I can see sort of where people come from with that, but I've always kind of viewed his stuff as he's just very earnest in trying to tell a story to the point that it can sometimes, I guess, seem over insistent. But there you go. But I'm not going to die on that hill of that kind of stuff. But I think he's very adventurous as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, and he looks at filmmaking as a process of telling a story. And he's an interesting kind of bridge between, near art house and the mainstream. So yeah. He's got his faults, but I think on the whole he's been a positive part of the cinematic world. I mean, there's plenty of criticisms to level at Kubrick, but very few of them sort of relate immediately to his filmmaking. Well, that was dark. They hung the kitter. Oh, it's Fulci's gone into exorcist mode. Well, I'd say all of his work was very self-indulgent in some respects, but in that he really kind of went for the films that he wanted, the stories that he wanted to tell, and the specific way that he wanted to tell them. When it comes to him being a perfectionist, that was really kind of the source of that for me. Not so much in the details of, oh, which angle was the lamp positioned in and that kind of stuff, but in getting exactly what he wanted from actors and things like that. Getting the writing done, shooting multiple takes of each and every shot. I think Tenet was probably one of his most flawed films in many respects, but I did appreciate the ideas and the effort that went into trying to make it work. It's just I don't think it necessarily worked entirely. But it was an interesting ride for me. I enjoyed the film. But if I was to look at it, full on critically, it would be probably detrimental. Whereas Inception, for instance, I think became much, much better by looking at it in detail and trying to figure stuff out. And the whole idea, that I kind of felt that the entire movie is basically Cobb being subject to an inception to help him get over the problems in his life, made the film a whole hell of a lot richer and more interesting and make more sense. It's quite a moustache. See, I think the cult of personality thing is a little bit overstated. I tend to think it gets thrown about by people who don't like Nolan as a charge against those who do. At least, that's kind of in my experience of it. Because I've asked, people, particularly Josh, actually, because Josh is not a Christopher Nolan fan in the slightest. He does not like the guy. Whenever he's kind of like criticised Nolan's work, I've always asked, what exactly is it that you've got a problem with? When you say it's pretentious, what he does, what exactly is it that you are finding pretentious? And I never get a real answer for that. I kind of get the feeling some people get a gut feeling that his work is pretentious, as opposed to really sort of having kind of hardcore sort of stuff that they can look at and go, no, there's a real problem with this film. Because I don't think he condescends to the audience, for one thing. Yeah, we started to film a little while ago. We're about just over a bit over halfway, approaching 2/3 of the way through. But it's the Black Cat, and we're at 56:35. I don't know. It would be DC. I think Dunkirk. It's not a perfect film. It certainly is a historical document. There's certainly things that are kind of not right with it. However, I think the stories are kind of interesting. It's kind of ambitious. Maybe it was a little over ambitious. But I don't think it's a bad film as such. But it's just a difference of opinion. If it didn't resonate with you, then it's going to feel like a bad film to you. You can say that about any movie, I guess. My opinion on Zack Snyder, for instance, his. Although when I criticise Zack Snyder, it's usually very specific things like about characterization and things like that. But generally, when people kind of like, say, oh, Dunkirk's a bad film, I rarely get any kind of specifics about it. And maybe it's just because they can't quite put their finger on what's bad about it for them. Always wonder what a Nolan horror film would be like. Probably not far off of the second Batman film, to be fair. But it would be interesting. I think it would anyway. I don't hold Nolan up as being, kind of the greatest filmmaker ever or anything like that. But I do appreciate that he makes films that I at least kind of think are making an effort. Sometimes those efforts don't pay off. Sometimes he's overly ambitious. If there was any charge of pretension, I would say that sometimes his some of the creative decisions that are made with technical aspects of the film can sometimes be a bit problematic for the general audience. I wonder if he's feeling he's going to break into some sort of Dr. Zeus sort of thing. Lucio Fulci, Stanley Kubrick collab. It would never happen. And the reason is that just neither one would want to cede any artistic control. I need a new headset. Oh my god, these things. It's actually putting dents in my scalp. maybe payday. I need to give myself some. I think Nolan's probably got places he can go. But I think with each film he's done, he has at the very least kind of tried to push his boundaries when it comes to ideas and things like that, of how to approach the film and the storytelling and methods of telling storytelling. Particularly with him, it's kind of like, multi-strand kind of things that mess with time. I don't know. We kind of see. I think there were some of the ideas in Interstellar. I mean, if I was to say that any of his films that I felt any disappointment in, it would be Interstellar, and it's not because of the filmmaking per se. Some of the story decisions were a little bit odd, though there's some real kind of high-minded sort of concepts he was trying to approach in that sort of thing, much like the film Contact. In fact, it borrows a lot from Contact. But some of the scientific ideas that kind of underpin that story can come across as being a little bit odd. Is it the Umberto Lenzi Cannibal Holocaust? Yeah, Kerry's right. Cannibal Ferox. But that'll be the next one. So what have we got left of this? We've got about 30 minutes of this one left. Oh, it's alright, Richard. Yeah, well, I hope you enjoyed it. Good God, that's a blast from the past. Naughty kitty. Patrick McGee, you can really chew the scenery. Yes, he can. It's a pissed cat. This is the cat's revenge for that movie. Was it Night of a Thousand Cats? Hugo Stiglitz. I haven't ever been one to look out for. Oh, they took every opportunity they could, didn't they, with Paul Shane's singing talent in Heidi High. We get sand in the rain over here as well. It's just not quite to that extent. I'll go out to my bike and it's just covered in this fine powder. From I think that's when it kind of whips up from the Sahara and stuff. He's feeling confused, yes. Ouchie. Our work here is done. Meow. Yeah, that's the one, Kieran. It's kind of like the feline version of I want to say Calamity of Snakes. What the fuck? Oh God. You know what? I'm so sick of all this bloody interruptions in the world at the moment. Fortunately, the fuel thing hasn't really kind of affected me because I'm on a motorbike and At worst, it's putting a couple of quid extra on my fill of my tank, so it's not too bad for me. But imagine filling a car is probably quite painful at the moment, let alone a truck. Calamity of snakes. Yes, thank you, Richard. That's probably about the most cliche accent, isn't it, in it with Al Cliver? He's got that kind of English Bobby kind of thing going on. Although his hair's way too long for a policeman of that era. Right, sir. You know what? And Rene Cardona Jr. I'm trying to think what the other one he did. What's it, Night of the Beasts or something like that? I've definitely seen another film by him, and I can't think what it is off the top of my head. A bad film that's made with passion is not necessarily a bad film per se. At least it's not unwatchable. You can get a really, really well made film that is awful to watch. A convenient accident. Well, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Possession is a film that is entirely coloured by the character, by the central character. It's an unreliable narrator thing, which is why it gets so extreme. You've got a guy who's paranoid, upset, emotionally kind of just wrecked. He's full of bitterness and hate and resentment, and that's how he sees the world, and that's whose eyes you're watching that world through. Possession is not supposed to be a literal film. It's a psychological take. Doesn't work for everyone, which is why some people find it, over the top and not much fun. But I don't think it's supposed to be much fun, especially when you consider the director. He was channeling a lot of himself in that movie. He was going through a bad divorce, so it kind of it shows. It's a film that, by design, carries a lot of misogyny, a lot of hatred towards women, particularly the central female character in that. And that's not a judgment of the film's value. Before anybody kind of gets upset about that, it's just that's what the film is kind of the eyes of which the film tells its story through. Because Sam Neill's character literally hates his wife, so we see the world through his eyes, and she's a monster, and she's fucking a monster. If that makes sense. But it shouldn't have been tongue-in-cheek, because it's not a film that has a subject matter that requires that. But it is a film about betrayal, kind of in a relationship, and separation, and that kind of rather misguided grieving process, if you like. Nah, just calling a spade on that one. People sometimes get touchy when you bring those things up. It's with me. There's plenty of films that are kind of, have that sort of angle, which are, fine, because they're telling an earnest and honest story. It's just a point of view. It's kind of like expressing certain feelings without necessarily endorsing them. And it is one of the things I have a bit of a problem with the New York Ripper, is that it is a film that just seems to utterly hate women. It does feel very much, and it's a directorial thing. It's not just an element of the story. It feels almost channeled, if you know what I mean. Lucio Fulci does have form on that, unfortunately. So there, yeah. Don't Go in the Woods is really boring to me. I can absolutely understand why. I find it kind of amusing, to say the least, but I love that scene. I think it's in that, if I remember right. The guy in the wheelchair trying to push himself up that kind of country walking path up to the top of the hill, and he gets up there and then he gets shoved off the top by the killer. Fight for Your Life was a good film. Be right back, just got to grab a beer. I particularly love the Italian filmmakers' penchant. It's Euro in general, but the Italians are really kind of big on it. But their penchant for that kind of pull shots and stuff like that, pulling the focus. Pulling the focal lengths and stuff. And zooming out and zooming in and kind of messing with the framing live. We're about 20 minutes off of that, so do what you need to, buddy. I always get the impression that Fulci hated doing horror films, or that he was associated with the genre. I think he put more characters erotic films like Devil's Honey. I think I think as with a lot of the Euro directors, there's certain things that they did just because, well, it's money and they've got to put food on the table and a roof over their head. Fulci, I don't know. I think he enjoyed doing certain horror films when he got to sort of be really creative with it. And films like this, for instance, do show quite a bit of love, as do House by the Cemetery, City of the Living Dead, and The Beyond. To an extent, Zombie Flesh Eaters. But yeah, if you're getting kind of crammed down that path, then yeah, it's going to be a difficult thing to deal with. I think it was Cat in the Brain, which is a very kind of self-reflective film. Has some interesting insights, I guess, into what Fulci thought of the genre. No, I mean it's not really kind of. I mean, certainly not when I'm talking about that kind of stuff. It's not because the woman's suffering hardship. Sometimes there are kind of framings of these kind of relationships, films' relationships with female characters, which is, particularly just aimed at being cruel, with no kind of real point. And I think, New York Ripper is a good example for me of that kind of thing. But then there's others which are kind of exploring it as a story element. It's a character element. It's the point of view character, how they see these women. And that's just as interesting. It's just as valid as any other kind of storytelling tool. And there's other ways that these kind of things happen. You look at Zardoz, it's the absolute opposite. in some respects. Actually, no, not the exact opposite, but it's kind of there's a sexual politic kind of angle which goes in that film. So you get these hyper masculine males who are the brutals, and then these rather effeminate society which are the Eternals, and the Eternals are dying out and they're bored, and they need this other character, this hyper masculine character to come in and sort them out, basically. To the point where there's a bit in the film where these the apathetics, who are these almost comatose kind of people, are revived by tasting Zed's sweat. So these kind of conversations are actually kind of an interesting sort of part of a story if they're used right. So you shouldn't be, kind of defensive about that stuff. I don't think you should be anyway. You have every right to be if you want to be, but I think you're denying, kind of a very rich part of a story if you're not interested in exploring those ideas. There's plenty of ideas in films that I don't agree with, but I can still enjoy the film absolutely thoroughly because it's kind of interesting. Yeah, I don't necessarily really hold with that. I think just about every character in that film was completely fucking retarded. Kieran, if you know what I mean. I don't think it was specifically. I just think it was a buffoonish film. Absolutely, there are films that are misandrist. Absolutely, there are. As well as misogynist. There's all kinds of points of views and extreme kind of angles of which these stories can be told from. And they can all be interesting if the film is made well. You look at a film like Downfall, as a for instance, and explaining that the film doesn't stand there kind of wagging its finger about Adolf Hitler as a character within the film. It doesn't kind of spend time labouring over the evils that the guy did. It tends to take a much colder kind of approach to this is the progression of this story. And some people could take offence to that, it's like, which is a little bit ridiculous. Because that's not what the film's about. It's about this rather extreme character who is in, facing, like the title suggests, his downfall. See, as much as I don't like New York Ripper, I can still watch it. There's certain aspects of it are kind of fun, but on the whole, ouch, bonk. There's certain aspects of it which I find off-putting, to the point I generally find it a quite unpleasant film to watch, and it's not just because of the violence, for certain. I'll happily sit down, eat my dinner, and watch Cannibal Holocaust, as a for instance. But yeah. Funny thing is, a lot of the films that we actually do enjoy, as a community, films like I Spit on Your Grave is a really good example, has been, kind of examined, written up and studied by some feminist film critics as being actually quite a feminist film. I would disagree to an extent. There are aspects of the film which could be read like that, but it's not misogynist, is what I would say. Which is odd, really, when you consider the film has a 45-minute sequence of rapes. Very true. There's all sorts of attitudes when it comes in filmmaking, but you got some really great filmmakers who were utter bastards and not just to women. But then you've got others who really kind of explored ideas. There's things like The Cannibal Man, which I've mentioned on several occasions, as being a gay interest film. Just exactly where you would not expect it. One of the wonderful things about horror, cult and exploitation films is sometimes they're very subversive, sneakily so, because they can get away with it. I sort of half agree with that. DC, yeah, there was a lot of that kind of rhetoric thrown around for that particular film, which is unfortunate. I mean, when I reviewed it, I kind of said it's no better than a meh kind of film. It really is. It is a very American film in terms of its humour. It's that kind of latter day SNL, which is very, very broad, very insistent humour, which doesn't translate well to Britain. Just as a lot of British comedy doesn't translate necessarily over to places like America. I'd be interested to see what the response to something like A League of Gentlemen, the TV series of Mark Gatiss et al., what that would have been over in America. Miyazaki is an interesting guy, I think. A lot of people give him a hard time over the sequel to I Spit on Your Grave, and you know it's definitely a flawed film, but it's not as awful as a lot of people kind of said. It's very patchy. Some of the acting's great, some of the acting not so much, and some of it is genuinely shocking. Yeah, a very good example actually there, Gav. When it comes to something like The Office, the Office, the original, is very, very British humour. And for the US remake to actually kind of even stand a chance, it did pretty well, didn't it, as far as I'm aware? It had to be changed. Because it needed to be something that American audience would identify with. And the British one was I was never a fan of even the British one, but it was a very very kind of British aesthetic apart from anything else. An office in a very industrial town. It's very lo-fi. The characters are kind of very recognisable, but also almost to the point of sleaziness in some cases. Didn't horrible reviews say he hated Deja Vu? You know, I don't think I saw that one. If he did, it's quite possible. I can see why people would hate it, but I didn't hate it. But I also didn't think it was anywhere near what the original was either. It's a little ramped up for one thing, and a lot more contrived. But it was all right. It was all right. Yeah, you know the whole kind of idea of the virtue signaling or woke politics in Ghostbusters 2016, I think, was kind of a little overbaked. It was more the stuff that sort of surrounded it that really kind of fed into that stuff. At least for my money. But it was a very meh film at best. If it wasn't a Ghostbusters film and it was just kind of like doing more or less the same stuff, I think people would have just written it off as being a bog standard comedy, and likely would have just gone straight to video. I'm not even biting on that one, Richard. I would suggest no one does. Let's not devolve into that. I mean, just get away from all that kind of crap. There's enough shit in the world at the moment. We don't need to be wallowing in that thing. Hello, puppet. Enough worms in my life, dear Richard. Here to enjoy, pleasant chat, interesting chat, I would hope, and a rather good Fulci film. Please don't, Richard. Let's leave the politics at the door when it comes to that stuff. I don't know if it's the softness of the shot or what, but he kind of healed very well from all the scratches on his face, and he must have hit that road bin with his face pretty damn hard. Fulci loves his zoom lenses. It's a big thing with the Italian exploitation scene in particular. It's like Umberto Lenzi was nicknamed Zoom Lenzi. So Franco does a lot of that kind of stuff, as does D'Amato, and all of them really. Yeah, counts to you as well, Kieran. You get me demonetized and I'm not even monetized. You buggers. I mean, to be fair, do you think I'd ever get monetized? I say fuck too often. But that's just me being me. I love profanity. It's probably why I overcompensate in my writing. See, I could solve this whole film, the problems for all of these people in this film, and it's just catnip. Just have a kind of like air blaster that just fires out, kind of, catnip. All the cats are just become like stoned. It'd be great. Oh, I know. It's fine. Just trying to stop things getting a little out of hand. Especially with these kind of things, they're very emotive. Get her! I want to see the credit on this one. It says Kittercam, operated by Kitter. Don't think anybody would ever give me over $1 million for anything, to be quite honest with you. Best I've got is kind of like copies of the the Blu-rays that I did the extras for and stuff. So it's a reward in its own right. It's a good job it's a hobby, otherwise I'd be starving. We talk about the weather if you like. Had rather nice weather here just recently. It's been very not overly hot. It's just starting to warm up a little bit, so it's a nice cool breeze, bit of sunshine, and clear skies at night, which is quite nice. But I do like it when it really rains hard. It'd be interesting to see you sort of like discuss that, Everett. That's genuinely, I do mean that. It would be actually genuinely interesting to see you kind of like discuss those later films and what it is you specifically you find about those movies to be more mature, and you know, kind of what elevates them for you. Because I don't think I've really watched much of the later Fulci stuff, if any. I think, you know, kind of Cat in the Brain, stuff like that, maybe, but yeah. Spring's favourite season for a reason. It's nice for... Yeah, summer's... I'm not a summer fan. It's too hot. It gets too hot and too uncomfortable. Especially in Britain, because it's very humid as well in the summer. I have enough trouble sleeping, and when it's hot, it's like really kind of just not pleasant for me. That's just me. Anyway, that's the first movie. That was actually really good. That was really good. That was some really kind of like, you know, Fulci kind of loving what he was doing, wasn't it? But we're going to watch Cannibal Ferox. We'll give it 5 minutes, and then we'll get cracking on that, because that's going to be an hour and a half as well. So be nice to finish before midnight if we can. Oh dear, Black Cat finished, and right after it brought me to a video from the Horror Geek. Meowvelous movie. Yeah. It might be worth kind of like looking at that again at some point, you know, when I'm not yabbering away and stuff like that. So one of the only things about watching these movies for the first time is obviously, you know, under this circumstance I'm dividing my attention somewhat. But that was a genuinely interesting Fulci film. And it's nice to see him when he's actually kind of doing something which is... Sorry, itchy back. He's doing something that he seems to enjoy. Well, English countryside and English actors, and really kind of buying into the sort of Poe stuff, although he is kind of stepping on Argento's toes somewhat with that. I don't know the Horror Geek, I have to say. Might be worth me checking out. Dear. It's good being home again. Yeah, good for you. Good for you. I don't know. I think am I not wrong in thinking that Arrow did a version of it? The Black Cat Fulci. Yeah, Arrow's got a version of it on Blu-ray. It's pretty cheap as well. $10.95. No, I'm not going to buy it right now. okay. I'm about when you start up Ferox, I'm not a fan of the cannibal subgenre, if that's okay. No, you feel free. You do what you want to do. Not here to please me. After all, I love the cannibal subgenre. It has to be said. I mean, it is. I think it's one of the first of the specific subgenres that I really started paying attention to. When I was really started looking at films and particularly kind of exploitation and horror, the cannibal subgenre was one of those really quite alluring ones because it was clearly, the most taboo of all of these things. And when I did the Blu-ray extra for Mountain of the Cannibal God, that was interesting because looking into the history of like cannibal representations of cannibals in movies and stuff like that, that was a big surprise when you can see just how far back cannibal stories go in storytelling in general. It's always been that real taboo subject that nobody can really fully get away from. And it is, you've got the modern day cannibal kind of stories, the reality ones, the real ones, your Ed Geins and so on, that are very compelling. Everybody's interested. So yeah, pre-ordered Henry. Hope it's a good transfer. That's the thing. Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer is one of those films that doesn't need a high def release. It doesn't. I mean, the whole point of it is supposed to be down, dirty, grimy. It is lo-fi. It's supposed to be shot on contemporary home video and that kind of stuff. It has that feel, that kind of almost like they were filming themselves. At least that's the kind of way I felt about it. But having a decent edition of it is probably more important. There's another film called The Black Cat, which has been called the unofficial Suspiria 2. I kind of I always have my kind of concerns about this kind of Italian film industry in particular was obviously notorious for having multiple titles for any given film. I've seen Jess Franco films, although not Italian, but Euro exploitation. Jess Franco films that have half a dozen or more titles that it went under. In fact, many films, particularly in the Italian exploitation and horror and those kind of genres, were just inundated with titles. I think Venus in Furs was an interesting one because it had an alternate title of Paroxysmus, which was quite an evocative title. But I always liked the really, 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 really stupidly long Italian ones. That seemed to explain just far, far too much. They always kind of amused me. Okay, right. So get yourselves ready and start giving us a thumbs up, and we'll get cracking on with Cannibal Ferox. Although it is titled on the link, on the video on the link, as Cannibal Ferox, which I don't know if it's a mashup. This is where we find out that it's awful. Good night, Kerry. Don't forget, clocks go forward an hour tonight. Oh, it is tonight, is it? Okay, that's fair enough. I don't stress about that so much as some people do. There's always this argument about kind of like, should do away with it and all that kind of stuff. But every time they've tried to do it in the past, they've ended up with pretty serious consequences. There's always a certain give and take when it comes to these things. If you do it, it annoys everyone. If you don't do it, people end up dying. And that's statistically so, although some say the change when you lose an hour kind of spikes heart attacks and stuff like that. So I don't know. Cannonball Run 2, yes. We could roll with that. That wouldn't be such a bad thing. I can't remember what it's like, but could be fun. Right. Okay, are you ready, folks? We will get started in just a few seconds. Cannot see that title without thinking of Hydrox, the knockoff version of Oreos in the US. Fair enough. It does sound more like a drain killer. Cleaner. Yeah. Oh, right, okay. Yeah. I've always wanted to spell Ferox with two R's for some reason, so every time I type it, I end up with two R's. Brilliant. People will start to get ready, so we will start in the count of 5 and go on. Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Now, I remember watching this film for the first time. I got it as a research for my dissertation at the time, so that was the first time I got to see this. You'd see it on the video shelves back in the day, briefly, obviously, but yeah, and this film had such a reputation. At least it kind of sells itself as being this quite extraordinarily violent film, and it is to a great extent. But I remember getting the DVD and stuff like that, and I kind of going, God, do I want to watch this? That shit was working on me. Because when I watched it, it's like it's gross and all that kind of stuff, but I kind of enjoyed it. Get on down. It's the 70s. Yes, it is. Well said, Luz. Cannibal Ferox is a very different film to Lenzi's earlier one, the one that arguably kicked off the cannibal genre. Though, like I say, having done a mini doco for the Blu-ray of Mountain of the Cannibal God, you start to realise that it's not a new thing. It's just the cannibal subgenre in the way that most people recognise it is through the Italian films, by and large. But Man from Deep River was the other one that Lenzi did, and kind of a take on A Man Called Horse. Far more exploitative in a lot of respects, but actually quite a good film. Very solid story, as it should be, as it's considering its inspiration. So this was kind of a response to Cannibal Holocaust. I think Lenzi sort of felt that his crown was being taken away to some extent, and decided to kind of jump in on, probably financial reasons as well. And it's clearly a much lesser film than Man from Deep River, in tone and purpose, really. But it doesn't make it any less fun. This is just that archetypal kind of Italian cannibal movie. It's so much more formulaic, because Lenzi sort of laid a lot of the groundwork for where Diodato went, for instance. But he's very much following the lead with this one. Yeah, I'm at 3 minutes 30 seconds, give or take. Because you got this trope with this film, which it really does try to follow the Cannibal Holocaust kind of formula. Because, again, as with a lot of Italian movies, they go, it's got to look like an American movie. So how do you do that? Well, you shoot in New York. But there's very few American films that really kind of look and feel like Italian exploitation films. And that's the one thing that they don't ever get. There's always that veneer to Italian exploitation films that always feel like Italian exploitation films, at least most often. It's only really Fulci's best works, for instance, or Argento's best works that really kind of shifted their style. The Old Mobster, played by John Barthes, this is his last movie. Yeah. Always preferred the alternative title, Make Them Die Slowly. Yes. Yeah, I think you're right there. It does feel like a comic book. A lot of these films did, though. There's a luridness of a kind of there's a kind of basic kind of look and feel to these things that does feel very sort of heightened. The locations that they use and all this kind of stuff. And I'm imagining this is probably the same place that they did some of the shots for zombie flesh eaters and things like that. They had the locations that they liked to go to. They knew they could get to them. They knew contacts there, all that kind of stuff. So, and there's also the kind of cross use of certain types of takes, alternate takes, extended takes, and all that kind of stuff. Jess Franco was another big one for that. He would film so much footage that other directors would borrow some of his footage, and he'd borrow from somebody else, and you'd see the same locations and same shots essentially in different movies. But the broadness of the characters and all that kind of stuff, the basicness of the situations, and let's be honest, a lot of the movies, Cannibal Holocaust is an exception, but a lot of the kind of knockoffs of that, like this, don't really have any kind of depth to them whatsoever. That's not what they're here for. The directors often intimate that they were being satirical and all this kind of stuff, and he's like, nah. Oh, that's cool, Kieran. Have you listened to the Lindsay Morgan commentary track? Yeah. Morgan's funny because he doesn't really like this one. To this day, he doesn't really like it, but he's become much more accepting of the fact that he was in this film and people were interested in his opinion. Lindsay kind of bloviates somewhat. It's kind of amusing. How about that shower? Liberated woman, ladies and gentlemen. So much nostalgia for this movie. I love studying films, but this makes me want to go back and see it again for the first time. It's nothing quite like the first time for watching this movie. Because there is an anticipation, like I said earlier, there's this anticipation of what exactly it is you're going to be faced with, especially with such a notorious film. Because it really did sort of ramp up what this film was going to be. And to a degree, they kind of succeed. There's a certain fulfillment of that stuff in terms of the gore and the violence which happens within the movie. But to be honest, so much of it doesn't really feel that malicious. It's not as pointed as something like Cannibal Holocaust is quite. It tries to be. It doesn't quite succeed. The characters are very, like I say, broad and not particularly refined. um, with this particular character, she's the reasons for her being there are clearly contrived. You know, it's like it's ridiculous. Bloody hate moustaches. Those kind of moustaches. I think they're really the absolute base for me. Tashes ain't for everyone. I was reading about that actually, Karen. Lieutenant. It's a throwback to translations throughout history, which is why we say lieutenant. It's kind of weird, but that's the English language for you, isn't it? America tends to be much more kind of that's how it's spelt, that's how we're saying it. Whereas Britain tends to carry a lot more weight with the historical aspects of the word. You just look at some of the place names in this country; they're just almost unpronounceable if you say them as they're spelt. Considering fancy blokes is significant to me if someone has a moustache or not. It's fair enough. All have our tastes, don't we? Keeps the sun off my chin. It's going to be a day at some point soon. I'm going to have to kind of, zip off the hair and stuff like that. But I kind of enjoy having the beard and moustache now. It's a personal thing, isn't it? Oh, God. It's just like this. So you got the native guy kind of catching that butterfly and just eating it. We're supposed to be repelled by it, but it's so kind of... Oh, God. What she's saying here is, please take this sacrificial animal. I imagine he's karaokeing it tonight. Old Simon. Does like his karaoke. Always said I should pop up and see Simon because I owe Simon a debt of gratitude for a lot of the help that he's given me over the last few years with various projects. He's a genuinely decent guy. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, one of the few scenes that was actually cut from this film in the latest release of this film was that muskrat of Cotamundi, more accurately, bouncing off of the side of the car. Sorry, just checking my levels. It's kind of pretty, isn't it? Odd thing, a beard, even a goatee, does not bother me. But a moustache just really rubs it the wrong way. I have a pretty big head. That's the only thing, DC. It's thinning out too much on top now, so it's going to be a matter of time. But I may just keep this as a tribute. We really ought to have like an animal death count on this, shouldn't we? Just go ping. It's not really a mod, but it's a smock morph too. Quite a nice little thing. Goes through the tank very fast though. It looks like a big tank and it's not. So that might be something that I kind of try to find some sort of upgrade for, is a bigger tank on it. Aging really sucks. It is what it is. We all get older. It's unavoidable and just not worth concerning yourself with. That's one of the things I'm apparently rather good at, is going, if it's unavoidable and I can't do nothing about it, I'm going to worry a lot less about it. But I'll stress about stuff I should be able to control, or at least make some contribution to. Well, we had the Bloody Moon main theme count for the watch-alongs. We can do an animal death count here. Yes. God, I've got to watch that film again, Bloody Moon. Definitely a guilty pleasure. I mean, these characters, aren't they? They're just so... They're played hysterically. It is kind of like this sort of parody of the original sort of Journey into the Jungle type movies. When you look at a film like Mountain and the Cannibal God, it's a much more traditional style, just kind of ramped up in the horror. But this is really kind of low rent sort of parody of that almost, with the ramped up horror. What's the appeal of vaping for you? Is it the flavour? It's a few of those things. It helps me relax a little bit. I am, subject to a lot of stress, particularly with work and stuff at the moment as well. So it just helps me chill out a bit. It's either that or I'd be eating a load of sweets and I'd be about 3 times the weight I already am. But I find it pleasant. And it's less offensive to people around than smoking as well. Not that their offence is particularly an issue for me, but I thoroughly understand why people would not want you smoking around them. Oh, yeah, Bloody Moon's just great. As a Franco bad movie, and it is a bad movie on so many levels. Even as that, it's just a lot of fun. I'm a cannibal. Get me out of here. See, the funny thing is, a lot of people kind of look at a film like this and, take a lot of offence at the portrayal of these characters without kind of realising that, these characters aren't really a representation of anyone in particular. It's not like it's kind of pointing at certain people. In fact, you look at throughout the history of these kind of things, and there are certain films in the past which were very kind of like, problematic in terms of how they kind of portrayed local, native cultures of like South Pacific type islands and things like that. Often they portray them as cannibals, and they weren't cannibals. It kind of fed into that whole kind of white game hunter type kind of aesthetic. As people obviously weren't so well travelled, and seeing footage of this stuff and this weird things that different cultures would do were very much more mysterious than they are these days. 5+3 maggots. Kieran, you're doing God's work, man. We have done Bloody Moon before. It's a little hard to find online, but I'd be happy to do it again at some point. See, the amusing thing is they sort of like the apologetics that goes on when it comes to the director explaining these scenes, and I believe Lindsay was kind of like, oh no, it survived, it's okay. It's like, and I don't. And Lindsay was a lot less apologetic for his behaviour when it comes to the animals and stuff uh, than Diodato was. It's always been one of the biggest controversies of any of these movies is the aspects which are really kind of like a nod to the Mondo films and things like that. No, there is no point to it. It doesn't really even work in a Mondo style. Sometimes it kind of does, other times not so much. But certainly the films that were previous to this, that was all part of the kind of like the danger of the jungle and that kind of stuff. And it'd be a lot more brief, but a lot of these guys got a lot more interested in showing more extended versions of those things. So, Cotamundi, Richard. Yeah, very much. Yeah, you're quite right. It is trying to outdo Cannibal Holocaust. I mean, even the rhetoric with the promotion stuff like that was very much pushing that kind of aspect. Here he is, our hero, ladies and gentlemen. He certainly kind of said that sort of stuff. Diodato sort of went backwards and forwards an awful lot on this stuff. Sometimes he was very dismissive of the concerns, and other times he was a bit like, I was misguided, and other times he was like kind of like making other excuses for it. But certainly it was reported not just by him, and if it was just Diodato saying it, I would be a little bit dubious that most of the animals were eaten. They were, by and large, in Cannibal Holocaust, they were given pretty clean, quick deaths. There was one exception, which was really the Cotamundi, which is a very botched attempt to kill the animal. It was really quite, beyond distressing for the animal. And that was the one scene that I always said that the BBFC would never allow. Because I'd kind of called it out previously that, a lot of this stuff is the sort of stuff that you would be able to see in other films. And, films like Apocalypse Now, for instance, features animal death, real animal death. So it's kind of hypocritical when you apply it to this movie, Cannibal Holocaust. This is the one scene that it was always going to be a problem, was the Cotamundi being slaughtered. And sure enough, that was the case. Giovanni Lombardo Radice is like kind of like it's always the fun aspect of some very awful films. So much going on in these films, which is just disgusting and gross, and otherwise could be depressing. But he always manages to elevate the film for me. Just makes it so much more enjoyable. Oh yeah, yeah. Cannibal Holocaust is definitely one of those films that really kind of had an influence. It had an effect. Though was it the Green Inferno, the Eli Roth film? I think takes much more from this than it does from Cannibal Holocaust. Although Eli Roth, I think, would probably say otherwise. Certainly the kind of frivolity of what Green Inferno is, and the excesses that it sort of goes to, the way, the style that it kind of presents this sort of stuff in, for me, lent itself much more towards being a remake of Cannibal Ferox and Cannibal Holocaust. Including all the sort of social issues that they're trying, he was, addressing within that film, the logging and all that kind of stuff that was going on, and the political students going into the jungle, doing activism, that kind of stuff. There's much more in line with this story. Oh, I want to say Vestron, but let me just double check that. It was Vipco. At least the re-release of it was. See if we can find the original cover. Here we go. Replay. That's one of the VHSs I would love to have an original of. That, Cannibal Holocaust, I Spit in Your Grave, SS Experiment Camp. Love his death scene in Cannibal Apocalypse. I think I had the VPD release of Apocalypse. I think VPD was Replay Video VPD, which is Video Program Distributors. Hello, Simon. We were just talking about you, fella. I assume you've been out karaokeing. Good to see you, man. Anyway. We're indulging in Cannibal Ferox at the moment, so just so you know. But I hope you're having a lovely evening, whatever you're doing. See, I love I love the hero guy in this. He's just this sort of weird, weird stereotype of the hero character. Considering some of the cool stuff that Lindsay did with Man from Deep River, it is kind of amusing. Oh, you're attending Comic-Con in Birmingham, but yeah, it's kind of amusing that he really does have this lack of subtlety in this film. Though that's a weird thing to say about a film called Cannibal Ferox, but yeah. Yeah, you take it easy, Simon. Have a lovely time. Hope you're getting some good food and all that kind of stuff as well while you're there. Because food is important. What's interesting is, a lot of these locals that get kind of employed to play these characters, how their reactions are, years and years later. And I do have a video extra that you can kind of pay to sort of download from. I think it's from Arrow, related to which one was it? I'm trying to think. I think it might be Cannibal Holocaust. Yeah. But they met a whole bunch of the actors like years on who played like the locals and stuff like that, and did their kind of like talked about their memories and took them to the locations, at least what they remember as the locations. It's just the jungle, it changes year to year, let alone decades later. But that's quite fascinating. They like their big grubs, don't they, in this movie? It's so hammy, isn't it? I mean, it's not the worst dubbing in the world, but it does feel like dubbing. To be honest, I mean, they did quite a good job with a lot of it, getting the lip syncing right and all that kind of stuff. But it's also it's always something about that, isn't it? About the way the texture of the dubbing never quite matches what you would expect it to feel like. They don't always quite match up with what you would imagine somebody with that who looks like that would sound. This one's just ever so slightly off. And why give him the antibiotics? This character is very much a moustache twirler, isn't he? I am evil. Oh God, Richie just said bacon sandwiches. Oh. It's found it's a rather oddly paced kind of section of the movie. Uh, yeah, because everything's slowed down now. We've got to have like an animal death. It's actually something I did point out on the Mountain of the Cannibal God extra, when talking about because the subject always comes up when it comes to Italian exploitation, well, cannibal genre stuff. Um, and it's always, why is it there? And, the origins of it being from Mondo and stuff like that. Because in a Mondo film, it was part of, because Mondo is essentially documentary, although it's a sort of very heightened documentary, a very contrived documentary. That was kind of the reason it was there, is because it was sort of showing the reality of the situation and all that kind of stuff. And then these movies sort of cottoned onto it. But one of the things about jungle adventure stories is, these journeys are supposed to be quite epic, and there's only so much it can really go on, to make it into a feature film. Because how long can you show people wandering through the jungle without incidents happening? So it's either going to have to be kind of like human devastation happening every 5 minutes, or you stop every so often and kind of remind people that they're in a dangerous place by showing the cycle of life and death going on. And it becomes almost like a punctuation, a way of just sort of breaking up the monotony of strolling through a huge jungle. Because you've always got that problem. It's like you either show the epicness of the journey, which will take time, but will be very, very slow and dull, and you're in the jungle. What's the how much have you got to see? you know? Oh look, there's a tree. There's another tree. Oh great, there's a bush over there. That's really interesting. Um, so they put this stuff in because it's a cheap way to kind of break up the action somewhat. Douglas, any thoughts on the other rip-off Zombie Holocaust? It was a favourite of mine back in the day. Um, it always felt to me like a film that was kind of made up of scraps of other films, and to an extent that is actually the case. Uh, Zombie Holocaust has a lot of scenes that were cut, but basically outtakes or repeats from Zombie Flesh Eaters, for one thing, like I mentioned earlier. I always preferred the alternate title, Doctor Butcher MD, wasn't it? If I remember right. So yeah, it's definitely not my favourite, but what are you going to do? It's kind of one of those quintessential ones in the genre that you should watch if you're a completist, but it's not the first one I would show anyone. See, well, this kind of conflict of these characters, in particular, is not really handled that well in here. With Mountain of the Cannibal God, it was handled much more interestingly, and even in the film Cannibal, which is Diodato's first cannibal movie, that conflict of the characters in Cannibal Holocaust, indeed. The way the characters are in conflict, ethically, professionally, with regards to their experience of this wild world that they're in and all that kind of stuff. Lenty really didn't nail it in this movie. No, it's fair enough. I don't take that away from you, John. If you like that movie, it's great. I just found it kind of underwhelming, personally. But far be it from me to kind of like take away your enjoyment of a film. Absolutely should not do that. You're incredibly enthusiastic about just about every film you come across, and it's quite a wonderful thing. Cannibal Holocaust did it. It kind of smacks of trying too hard, doesn't it, really? I mean, there is kind of, as excessive as it is in Cannibal Holocaust, there was a point to it in Cannibal Holocaust. Um, I mean, partly it was kind of like introducing to kind of like what you have to go through, sort of the things that we don't think about when it comes to production of food and stuff like that in a country. That's not explicitly what he was trying to do, but that's kind of what it evokes, and it also kind of shows the callousness of the bad guys, particularly when you're talking about the death of the turtle, and they're kind of like the nature of the survival aspects and stuff like that when it comes to the Cotamundi and so on and so forth. The shooting of the pig is just the pig would be quite a valuable thing in a community like that, and they just come along and casually just blast it away. But it always feels a lot more frivolous in this film. It's like, because Cannibal Holocaust did it, they just took this sort of the image of it and kind of like transferred it, just redid it for this film, but without all the kind of stuff that surrounds it. The real way Donatello died. Oh dear. Just, oh, bless bless him for really, really kind of like looking earnest about it. I will be right back. Bunch of old fogies. Oh dear. Turn left at Cannibal Island. Yeah, I love that bit where he's kind of like, they're doing the sort of map, and it's not. It's just him kind of rearranging a little bit of random dirt on the top of that oil canister. It's just kind of. You see that looking at it again. Very interesting. Oh, I'm still playing. Well, I kind of picked it up again recently. Just kind of fun. I don't play the game particularly more. I just kind of build shit. I built my theatre at one point, but now I've got a place with a yacht and a submarine and all that kind of crap. It's kind of fun. It's a nice way to relax. Maybe I'll do another little video of the of my current creation, as is. The place I'm doing, like I say, it's got a sub and it's got a boat. It's kind of a Bezos yacht. kind of thing going on in the little supermarket which I'm building on it. It's kind of fun. Sort of like an unlimited Lego, isn't it? Boom. It has to be said, for all the things that you can complain about this movie, it is quite eye-catching. No, I know. Don't go there, Glenn. They really did go to town on the special effects and stuff like that. They really didn't half-arse it. The rest of the film's just an excuse for those kind of set pieces and that sort of stuff, but filmmaking really is amazing. The fact that these people went through all of this to make a movie is something. You've got to love their bravery as well. Yeah, I mean, for all the things that you can complain about these movies, yeah, the crappy stories and dubious acting and stuff, they often went through a fuck ton of stuff to actually do these films. Usually in very unpleasant circumstances. When you look at a lot of the Euro exploitation in particular, some of the places they went to film these things, and of course you got real imagination going on in a lot of these set pieces. Like with, excuse me, like with films like Zombie Flesh Eaters, as an example, having that scene of the shark attacking the zombie. It's really quite audacious. And they were trying to do something very specific with these films, for the most part, was to make the most eye-boggling movie that you could subject an audience to. And for the time, a lot of these films, including this film, were very successful in that kind of stuff. The whole kind of 42nd Street kind of aesthetic. These are the sorts of films that were, along with sex films, were the staple of that kind of era. Back to the crime movie B plot. Yeah, they're always a little bit kind of crowbarred in there, aren't they, to say the least? It's not just this film. There's so many of these films that indulged in that kind of stuff. I've got to remind people this is an American movie, and it's not, obviously. being self-indulgent in a film. Pretension is really self-indulgence to an extent, but it's as much to do with it being self-important, probably more than self-indulgent. There is an indulgence involved in it, but it's for me, Pretension is a film that tries to kind of like send a message, but is overly insistent in that their position is the one and only. It's a fine line between that and being accurate, though. You know. The whole idea that your vision, your ideas are being perfectly transmitted via the medium of your movie can come across to an audience as being pretentious. Yeah, I guess Christopher Nolan kind of falls into that in some viewers' eyes. Personally, from most of his movies, I've always seen him exploring ideas rather than kind of saying, this is how it is. I mean, as enjoyable a film as something like The Rock would be, it is to most people. It's a film with certain ideas that can come across as being incredibly pretentious, because it doesn't really sort of explore some of the finer points of what it's trying to say. There is a genuine kind of heartfelt sort of subtext to the film. Not even just subtext, but some of the points that it's trying to make are quite genuine, but it is incredibly over insistent about certain aspects of it, and it does get a bit lost in itself. So there is an element of pretension within that. Yeah. I tend to use more words, Frank. It's all it is. Bloviating fool what I am. There's a lot of people who would look at a film like Eraserhead as being pretentious, or David Wood Lynch's works in total, in general, because they do certain things that people either struggle to get, kind of like behind the eyes of what the director's trying to do and that kind of stuff, or just that they don't understand it, what he's trying to do with this thing. It's been obscure for obscurity's own purposes. I tend to try to avoid using the word as much as possible, because it could just be that I'm missing the sort of direction that the writer or director is sort of coming from. Zardoz, funny enough, I think even the director kind of like, well, they wouldn't describe it as pretentious. It certainly comes close to being that, because it throws a lot of very kind of like, high-minded and thoughtful sort of subject matter at the screen, but then to a degree kind of fails to sort of follow through. And I hasten to add, it is still a film that I really, really do like. And I like the fact that he kind of, in that film, he tries to, earnestly tries to do a lot of stuff. Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think you're right there, Kieran. I have noticed, particularly, and it's not to have a go at Americans, but American audiences, even a lot of critics struggle with certain aspects of European cinema. Because European cinema can be kind of like come at things from something of a odd angle. Can often be very sort of psychologically based in their point of view, to the point that everything that you see in the screen is coloured by the POV characters' sort of opinions and view of the world and all that kind of stuff. It can come, if you can't sort of reconcile those things, it can come across as being pretentious, and it's like, well, no, that's not really what the director was necessarily going for. So you have to be a little careful with it. Get the pot ready, boys. Yes. Oh, come on, try harder. It's not that strong. It's got all the bars are sort of like wobbling and stuff, and he goes, "Oh, I give up. I've had enough. I can't possibly escape from this thing." Ouchie. Might need a styptic pencil for that one. Need to use two a day. See, this is one of the bits that kind of leans towards a certain pretension with this film. Because DeSalle's character it's constantly trying to disprove cannibalism and all that kind of stuff, and you get all these kind of like little reminders throughout, and then she's sort of having to deny it in her own head and that kind of stuff. It just feels like it's trying that a little bit too hard. Got a feeling I might be coming down with a little bit of a cold. A bit sniffly. Can't afford to get ill at the moment. I've got far too much on at work. Oh dear. That's ahead of. Come on, bitch. Tell us where it's at. I didn't mind Midsummer. I didn't think Midsummer was pretentious. Again, it's another one of those that really it's a point of view aspect. So there are things, the way that the world is looked at is again coloured by the protagonist's opinions and kind of how she sees this world that we're watching. So essentially watching it through her eyes. I'd say it was everything other than pretentious. I mean, it lays it on a little bit thick, maybe, but now I guess you could potentially give it that charge, but yeah, I don't know. It is funny, kind of like how other people kind of like see these things. But a lot of people have said that. I've never felt it about it myself. I actually, kind of really admire some of the stuff that has been, coming out of the last 10 years. There have been some very adventurous, interesting, thoughtful horror films. Films that really kind of stand in contrast to the vast majority of the the offerings, particularly in horror genre, but not only that, but even in the mainstream and other genres. You're talking like kind of like Hereditary and all those kind of films, Color Out of Space, Beyond the Black Rainbow, Mandy. Some really fascinating stuff, and I would very happily put Midsummer right in there. Kieran, yeah, I can certainly understand that. Yeah, derivative, but I would say derivative with a very small d. Yeah, it has its commonalities with the Wicker Man, particularly, but it's not a remake of the Wicker Man. It takes some of the same ideas of the whole kind of folk horror sort of thing. Um, I thought it was a genuinely interesting film. I mean, I think some people get rubbed up by the um, potentially some of the political aspects of it. Um, there are certain parts of it that kind of don't jive, and when you kind of look at the main character, a lot of people, and including myself, are very critical of that main character. Not necessarily because not because she's badly acted or badly written or anything like that. But she's clearly a very, very deeply flawed character, and I think that's intentional. So I don't think you're supposed to be entirely behind her, and I don't think that's the intent of the film to do that. But like I say, it's everything about that film is kind of seen through her eyes. I haven't seen Don't Look Up, no. There's a new one out, X as well, I think it is, which I would like to see. But Don't Look Up, yes, I've heard good things about it. Balls out, balls off, yes. But one of the nice things about doing all this kind of stuff and chatting with you guys is it is interesting to see the different points of view and talk about that stuff. I wish it could be a lot more kind of direct in some respects, but it's very difficult to do. Maybe I should do something like a Skype call type, meetup type thing or something like that. Could be interesting. There is a certain aspect of that DC of what the fuck did I just watch? Absolutely. Um, I think I tend to delight in that personally. I like it when the movie challenges me to revisit and think about that stuff. And usually you can get a good feel for whether it's the movie's fault or whether it's just it needs more attention or maybe it needs a little bit of thought. Usually that's quite a natural thing for me. I think it's rare that I'm so turned off by a film that when I come back to it again at a later date that I would not feel the same about it. Eraserhead is a film that took me a few viewings to appreciate. I had to work quite hard with that film, and I think I actually appreciate it more because of that. Like I say, I mean, I don't necessarily when it comes to the politics of something like Midsummer. I don't necessarily have to agree with the politics in their entirety. Sometimes what's interesting is just the insight. Nice guppies. Um, yeah, sometimes it's the insight. Sometimes it's seeing these worlds through other people's eyes. Because if a film is really kind of trying to put a point, it's always a very helpful thing to put it, to filter it through the character. Because otherwise it becomes preachy. And in the case of something like not Hereditary, in Midsummer particularly, I don't think it is. It's not a preachy film. At least it isn't to me. And that's mostly because the central character is so heavily flawed. Um, the film seems aware of that, and it doesn't seem afraid to actually kind of put that forward. And that's why I don't think it's essentially a whitewash of whatever opinions it's putting forward. Fair enough. You don't. Nobody's going to force you to watch the movies. Generally, the nice thing about the world we live in is you're not generally forced to watch movies unless you're living in some sort of Nazi Germany like world where you have to sit down and watch the propaganda. Even if you consider the news to be propaganda, you don't have to sit down and watch it. When it comes to that sort of thing, though, Frank, I mean, when it comes to a character being flawed, I find that interesting. A flawless character is a boring character. Um, Even with the Marvel universe and stuff like that, you got Captain America, and he has his flaws. It'd have been very easy to portray Iron Man and Captain America and all the others as not being flawed characters, but they all have their individual things that make them less than perfect. Yeah, I think the only film I was, oh well, it wasn't really forced to, but it was film studies, and I think it was Tarkovsky's Mirror that I had to sit through, and that was a little painful, but I kind of partly put that down to the fact that I was working my ass off at the time, so I was tired, and I was just not ready on that day to sit through a tricky Russian movie. Yeah, yeah. With Cannibal Holocaust, definitely that last line is. Although I'm not sure if it's as much to do with it being lost in translation, but I don't think it is. But that's kind of one of those things where you can fairly call it pretentious. It's a bit pretentious. It's a little over insistent, and kind of like feel the weight of this, without really grounding it in the characters. I think, particularly with maybe we're the cannibals, or who are the real cannibals kind of thing, is that it's very difficult to deliver it in the voice of the character that's spewing these words. You know what? I mean, talking musical numbers. Just rewatched that recently. It's a fucking great film. I'd love it if he just kind of like recited what the policeman said in his same language. He said, blah, 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 blah. True, that would belong better in a police squad film, but yeah, I totally. I mean, I'm kind of. I have to be in the right mood to watch a musical. It's not my first choice of genres, to say the least, but a good musical. Again, it's this sort of heightened reality where it's not. None of it's supposed to be kind of like realistic. That's not the point. Good musicals really kind of give you an insight into what the character is and how they're feeling and all that kind of stuff. It's in a obviously very fantastical kind of way, but he runs around and digs really well for a man with his cock cut off, doesn't he? Yeah, I can understand why people struggle to suspend disbelief in stuff like musicals, and the vast majority of musicals I've got very little interest in because there's so few that are actually really well done. Yeah. Animal Count, Death Count 11. Thank you, Kieran. But you get a musical like The Wall, for instance, and it's quite a powerful film. He's such a bastard, isn't he? Need to see Evil Dead the musical. I have seen it. I saw it in Toronto. In when was it? 2006. Cannibal the musical by South Park. Yeah, that was great fun. Rocky Horror Shop treatment. Little Shop of Horrors. I think Little Shop, for most people that would be in my audience, would be a real good entry into that kind of film, that kind of genre, the musical. because you can much more. I mean, it's a fun film. At the very least, with great music. But if you kind of really sort of look at it and study it as well, you can kind of see why what's going on with the music. Why are they singing? What are these songs? What's the purpose of them? Before Justin Trudeau. I love Canada. The couple of times I've been there, it's been great experience. But it's funny, Canadians tend to trash Toronto, but I kind of like it. I'm not even a big city kind of guy, but I got a certain amount of affection for the place. Oh dear, not his wanking hand. Yeah. Well, there's only so many kind of aerial shots of the Amazon that you can get your hands on, I guess. That look different. I'm more likely to be kind of accused of being snob when I kind of look at the films that I do with the kind of way that I do and all that sort of stuff. But I like to elevate these films to the best level that I can without being dishonest about it. That's my mission. Hey, I used to live in Canada. Do not miss it. To be fair, I was there on holiday, so I was intending to have a good time. So, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the hell out of it. I'm sure I'd enjoy America if I ever got over there, but I don't think they'd let me through the border. I'm a little upfront about my opinion. So if I ran into your TSA, I'd be kind of like, oh shit, okay. Funny enough, though, I mean, as a younger man, I was always kind of intrigued by New York, but the older I get, the less I'm kind of willing to go to a place like New York. But places in America, I would love to. There's plenty of places in America I'd love to go. But if I went, I'd have to go visit Wisconsin because I've got plenty of friends up that way. I would absolutely love to meet Josh face to face, as for one thing. I know it's one of those iconic scenes in this film. It's just like, oh shit, okay. I love the way we've had several scenes and that hair in the gate's still been there. It's, I mean, I appreciate they're in the jungle and all, but a few years back, I held the UK in high contempt for a simple reason that my classmates were utter pricks. Very daft reason to hate everything about a country, honestly. Well, I'm always of the mind that every country's got good people. And it's got bad people as well. Just hopefully you meet more of the good people. One of the reasons I have such high regard for Finland, for instance, which, as a young man I would not even have thought about, but I've met some lovely, lovely people from there. And as a consequence of that, I would love to visit the country. Hello, John Smith. I know it Reggie Dale's thing. It's constantly been there, as it keeps popping its head in every so often. See, Cannibal Holocaust had all those film reels and all that kind of stuff that they found as evidence, and here they've got a single camera. They're like, oh, ooh, a Pentax. This is not native to the region. It's how brutally they get killed, DC. It's always one of the funny things with this particular scene. She's got the hook through the old like that, and she's just like kind of bolt upright. Oh, surely she'd be a bit more like that. The centre balance is completely off. It's one of those things. I'd make a joke about it, but that's one of the things that makes this whole scene, this whole film, it's very illustrative of why it feels so comic book. None of it feels particularly real. Whether it's the cock chopping or whatever. Even DeSalle kind of like up like that. She's clearly just got her hands up. She's not really kind of like, tight. She's not hanging off the thing, because to do that would actually be not only uncomfortable, but probably physically dangerous to the actress, because the more you sort of you do that, it can end up suffocating you. You pass out. But you can tell, just instinctively, you look at something, you can tell that something's not quite right. It's a little bit off. That decapitation is just a really neat little scene, actually. I just appreciate it on a technical level, apart from anything else. Oh, thank you, friendly native, who has no reason to release you, or very little reason. See, the one thing about the animal death in most of these films, yes, it's unpleasant, but I wouldn't call it disturbing as much as disappointing a lot of the time. Some films justify it a little bit better than others, but ultimately, you're kind of going, you're making a film and you're being lazy. Especially when it comes to kind of a lot of the stuff in the Euro exploitation scene, it's often used as a shortcut for making shocking material. Oh well, that sucks. Tell Hollywood there's so much less without me. Nice one, Kieran. Dear. You fancy a hot dog after that? Okay. Go to certain restaurants, that's probably exactly what you're being served. See, there's not much of a character arc for this character. Going back to the Mountain of the Cannibal God, for instance, every character has an arc in that particular story, varying degrees and all that kind of stuff. Here, not so much. And it just really goes back to the whole kind of thing where I say character is so important, where, you know, a well-written character can not only engage the audience much better, but it can be, if it's a point of view character, can be used to be incredibly creative in how you tell that story. Shane Grindhouse didn't do an animal cruelty version version of Ferox like they did with Holocaust. Yeah, some people, it is a real kind of barrier to entry for a lot of people. I guess it doesn't affect me as much. It's not because I think it's any more right than somebody who is really kind of turned off by it, but there is some people really, really, really struggle with it. I guess I have a certain trying to think of the right word for it. Pragmatic, maybe, kind of mindset when it comes to that kind of stuff. I know, you know, where I kind of put it in terms of should it happen, which is no, it shouldn't happen. You shouldn't do that for a film. But I do know that it's not just, like I say, Italian exploitation that does that kind of stuff, or crappy horror films that do that. It has been Hollywood since its inception that did all that kind of stuff. And, you know, we're progressing past that. And it's worth knowing that, you know, Diodato himself was essentially prosecuted on that when it came down to it. When he realised he hadn't actually killed the human actors, they swapped over to the animal abuse that happened. Yeah, Kieran, and that's the thing. She turns out to be a fucking hypocrite. The film really doesn't do that much to kind of justify her taking this position. The only thing it kind of nods in that direction is it sort of maybe it's her way of thanking the native lad who releases her. But over and above that, it's a very weird ending for that character that completely destroys her arc. Not that she should turn around and go, no, it's all true, they are actually completely cannibals. It's just the fact that the thesis is like, cannibalism doesn't exist. It's like, that's the best thesis that you can actually come up with. Yeah, you know, and that's one of the things that kind of makes some of the things that happens in this a little bit pretentious. It either makes it pretentious, or she's just an awful, awful character, which is, you know, a bit of both. Everyone knows hypocrisy is the worst crime of all. Well, it isn't a good thing. I could point to many, many examples, some contemporary, but yeah, hypocrisy is a road best not travelled if you can manage it. But there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. Oh, it's just gone on to a film called Cards of Death. How exciting. Think of all the things she could have written is she claims it did exist. Exactly. You know, after an experience like hers, even if she's kind of like, politically like, I don't want to say that these people are awful and they deserve to be kind of taken over, yada yada, colonialism is bad, yada yada, whatever. There's an interesting lot of writing there, which would probably be a damn sight more worthwhile than whatever lies and bullshit she's come up with. And yeah, what you gonna do in the cooking pot, Iris? Yeah, they took a wrong turn. That's all it was. Blue Iris. Loved it. Nostalgia to the max. Yes, I enjoyed it. It's a film that definitely borders on a guilty pleasure in some respects. There is something which is just intrinsically enjoyable about such a shameless piece of crap like that movie really is. But as shameless pieces of crap go, it's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. But my God, you do really need to shut your damn head off for it in some respects. Well, that was jolly good fun. Really do adore our get-togethers like this. I love a lot of you. Really needed it with the audio of recent times. Well, you're very welcome, Frank. And it's been lovely to have the back and forth. Yeah, we don't always agree, but that's fine. It's all fun. It's fun to talk about these things. It's fun to disagree. We don't have to end up hating each other over those things. And I don't feel any particular overwhelming desire to be seen as right or win the argument. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Hopefully it just gives you something to think about. That's what's important. As dumb as it is, the goofy nature of and Radisha elevate it into something watchable. Yeah, I think that's it. It is just pure goof, that film, with an awful lot of stuff which really shouldn't be there. Ethically the film has got issues. But my God, if it isn't a fun little ride. Best cannibal movie, Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals. It is quite a movie, that one. To be fair, it'd be boring as fuck to agree on everything. No, I mean, dialogue is one of the things that makes life worth living. And it's one of those things that keeps you honest. Great double bill, great chatting with you all. Yes, it has been. And we are going to call it an evening there, because it's been quite a long one with the double bill and all. It's been an interesting chat, so thank you very much for that. And we'll see where we're at next week. I'll try and let you know midweek whether or not we're going to do one next week. After next week, it's going to be really difficult for a little while, as I am working my butt off at that point. I've got to work Friday and Saturday, so chances of me actually doing anything on that week is going to be very, very, very slim. And then following that, I'm not quite sure what's going on. However, we will get back to something, and maybe, everybody's talking about the Emmanuel films. Maybe we'll try and find something like that. That might be kind of fun. Let's watch some sexploitation. Oh, fuck yes. So I'm going to say good night. Thank you for coming along, and I'll see you at some point soon. Take care, you lovely, lovely bastards. Night, night.